And both of us are very pleased to have Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams, would you like to just introduce yourself briefly? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Good morning. I'm Cheryl Williams. I'm the Director of the Office of Medical Policy within the Office of Disability Policy of the Social Security Administration. I've been in my current position for the last 10 and a half years. We do have a specific body system in which the purpose of this discussion lives, I like to say. In fact, today with me I have Elena Ness, who is a supervisor of the Mental Disorders Body System, and we're glad to be here.
Welcome to both of you. Thank you for coming. I also want to just take this moment to remind everyone what Ms. Williams did so excellently, which is to please use your microphones. You need to press the button until you see it burn red, and then speak directly into the microphone so that everyone not only in the room can hear you, but importantly, we of course have people all over the U.S. and perhaps all over the world, I don't know, listening in today through the webcast, and we also take careful minutes, and so it helps to speak clearly to the microphones. With that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Susan Daniels, and who's going to do the roll call and the minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'll take the roll call for the IACC. So first on my list, Joshua Gordon.
Here.
Judith Cooper.
Yes, good morning.
Alice Cow.
Here.
For Linda Birnbaum. Cindy Lawler.
Yes, I'm here.
Or for Linda Birnbaum and for Diana Bianchi. Carrie Wolinetz.
Yes, here.
For Mrs. Collins. Elaine Hubel. Tiffany Farchione is not able to join us today from FDA. Melissa Harris.
Here.
Jennifer Johnson. And I think Jennifer has an alternate, may not be here yet. Laura Kavanaugh.
Here.
Someone for NINDS for Walter Korshats. Not here yet. Laura Pincock.
Here. Good morning.
Morning. Marcy Ronyak is not able to join us from the Indian Health Service. Stuart Shapira.
Here.
Melissa Spencer, or Cheryl Williams.
Good morning. I'm here.
Christy Kavulich for Wexler.
Here.
Nicole Williams. David Amaral.
Here.
Jim Ball. Samantha Crane. Jerry Dawson.
Here.
David Mandel is not able to join us today. Kevin Pelfrey.
Here.
Edlin Pena. Louis Reichart.
Here.
Rob Ring. John Robeson.
Here.
Alison Sitter.
Here.
Julie Taylor.
Here.
Is there anyone I've missed? And is there anyone on the phone that wants to let us know that you're on the phone listening in? All right.
Can you hear me through them, Jim Ball?
Oh, hi, Jim. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, and if anyone else is on mute, but you're going to be joining us, you can let us know that you're here. So thank you very much. We will move on to the minutes. So the minutes from the last meeting in October are in your packets, the draft minutes. Did anyone have any comments? Is there any discussion about the minutes? So hearing none, can I have a motion to accept the minutes? A second? All in favor of accepting the minutes as drafted, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Or any abstaining? So then the motion carries to accept the minutes as drafted here, and they will be posted on the web shortly after this meeting. Thank you. Welcome, Walter Korshats.
We next are going to have a report from Dr. Ann Wagner. Dr. Wagner, you all met at multiple meetings as the chief of the Biomarker and Intervention Development branch in the Division of Translational Research at NIMH.
About specifics if you want them. And then the third category is education and professional development. Larry Wexler at the Department of Education talked with us about their professional development grants programs that support 8,000 master's and doctoral level scholars. Education also supports IRIS centers to create free online learning modules to teachers, and they support an autism focus program, which is called AFFIRM, which also is the development of resources and modules. And Hae-Young Park at HRSA described the way their LEND program, which is leadership education in neurodevelopmental and other related disabilities, and their programs for developmental and behavioral pediatrics, the ways in which those are providing continuing education and training and technical assistance to people in the field as well. So that kind of background, I think, is very helpful to us as we continue our ongoing activities, one of which is to focus on the supports and services recommendations from the 2017 report to Congress on transition age youth with ASD and adults with ASD. We also are continuing to work on two projects that I mentioned last time. One is evaluating government-sponsored survey data sets that are collecting data on this age group, transition age youth and adults with ASD, in order to look at where there's overlap, where there might be gaps, identifying potential places where data might be combined. And then we're also gathering information on outcome measures. The report talked about the dearth of outcome measures or functional measures for this age group of people with ASD and the need for more. And we have identified some investigators supported by the Department of Defense, the Administration on Community Living, and NIH who are developing such measures. So we're meeting to plan a special FEWA meeting in which we will invite those people to give us updates on their projects and also look for potential collaborations, avoid duplication, look for other areas that might still be missing about ways to facilitate. That's my 5 minutes over. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks to everybody for participating on this working group.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee for Dr. Wagner? We'll move right along then to our first presentation of the day. And Melissa Harris is the Acting Deputy Director for the Center for Disabled and Elderly Health Programs at the Center for Medicare and Services at CMS. She's going to talk to us about the HCBS final rule.
Hi, thank you. So I'm really happy to be with you here this morning. I've been on the phone for the last several committee meetings, and so I wanted to share with you today a regulation that has come up a few times in IACC conversations, and I thought it would be helpful to have a dedicated conversation about it, and I'm happy to field any questions. Oh, thank you. I'm happy to field any questions if I can today, or take them back to my team and answer back to you as soon as we can. Let's see. There's a lot of information on these slides, and if they weren't contained in the material sent out already, I'm happy to send them to you, so please don't feel like you have to take notes. But the regulation that we're talking about is one that was published in January of 2014, so right around 5 years ago, and then it was effective in March of 2014, with the exception of the provision that we're going to talk about right now, which is the criteria defining a home and community-based setting for purposes of Medicaid payment. This regulation did a lot of things that are in effect right now, and we'll touch on those just briefly, but it tends to be known as the Home and Community-Based Settings Regulation, and so that's the provision that gets the most attention, and so that's what we're going to focus on today. And so we embarked on this regulation years before 2014. We actually used a vehicle that we don't use very often. Typically, when a federal agency is going to be issuing a regulation, they release a proposed rule saying, here's what we're thinking about regulating, solicit public comments, and then use those comments to inform any changes that take place in the final rule. We actually backed up a step in this regulatory adventure and issued what's called an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, saying that we're thinking about regulating in this space and to give us some ideas of what stakeholders want to see as the criteria of a home and community-based setting. Then we use those public comments to inform a proposed rule against solicited public comments, and then use those comments to inform the final rule that was published in 2014. And so we realized, as we were able to read through public comments, that as in many cases, viewpoints were all over the map in terms of the role that the federal government should have in defining a home and community-based setting, the types of issues that stakeholders felt were most important, be they safety of individuals, be they freedom to make an individual's own decisions, how to blend those two. Certainly got a lot of conversation in the public comments. And we realized that whatever set of criteria defining a home and community-based setting we ended up with would take some time for providers to be able to implement and states to be able to oversee. And so there was a transition period built into the regulation. It was initially a 5-year transition period, and so that would have expired in 2 months from now. The original end date of the transition period was March of 2019. We ended up extending that a couple of years ago, and so now the transition period runs through the middle of March 2022. And so we're going to focus on today what the regulation actually says for the criteria of a home and community-based setting. I'll touch a little bit on some of the decisions that are made at the federal level and some that are delegated to the state Medicaid agencies, and then where I see us going from here. But we really, one of the key reasons that set us off down this path of issuing regulations is that even many years ago, we could see the trend of expenditures in the provision of long-term care services in Medicaid increasing more in the direction of home and community-based services. In 2013, we finally crossed that threshold in the Medicaid program in which more money under the umbrella of long-term care was spent in home and community-based services than it was spent in institutional care. And that was a big benchmark, a big optic, but it also kicks off a lot of questions. As more and more money is going toward the provision of home and community-based services, what is the federal government buying with taxpayer dollars? What kind of criteria are defining the settings that are receiving funds for home and community-based services? What's the difference between that type of setting and an institutional setting, both in terms of individual freedoms, federal oversight, et cetera? And so those were some of the roads that were converging to make us know that we had to move forward in this space. Over time, there was an enormous amount of variation across the states in the types of settings that were providing home and community-based services and receiving Medicaid funding for those services. States would need to describe to CMS in the primary coverage vehicle, which was a waiver program found at 1915C of the Social Security Act. That's a coverage authority that's been in existence since the early 1980s and was for a long time, and really still continues to be the primary coverage vehicle for long-term care and Medicaid. States had enormous variety to describe to CMS the types of providers that were receiving Medicaid funding, the types of settings that those services were being provided in. There really was no standardization, and so someone receiving home and community-based services in one state could be living a very different life from someone receiving those same types of services in another state with regard to the amount of flexibility they had in setting their own schedule and determining what they did on a daily basis, who to interact with, those types of things. And so we felt as more and more dollars were being put into the home and community-based services arena that we needed to really understand what we were buying and how individuals were living. And so the main goal of the regulation was to bring a mixture of standardization and person-centeredness into the mix to really facilitate some beneficiary autonomy and some movement in the facilitation of person-centered care. So the next couple of slides walk through the actual criteria that's been outlined in regulation. There's a couple of different components of the settings criteria. This first cohort applies really to any setting that wants to be a provider of Medicaid-funded home and community-based services, whether it's a residential or non-residential provider, whether these services are being provided in a assisted living setting, for example, or some kind of day program, or some type of group home, or whatever. And so, in some ways, these characteristics are very basic. The individual needs to be supported to have access into the greater community. The individual needs to select the setting from among setting options. There need to be opportunities for an individual to pursue competitive, integrated employment, and the services need to be provided in such a way that the fact that an individual is receiving Medicaid services does not set up any type of barrier to receiving services. There shouldn't be any real difference in how Medicaid services are provided versus non-Medicaid services are provided. That's really what the criteria in the bottom left category is. It sets up a bit of a comparison between how other individuals in that same community who are not receiving Medicaid services receive care, interact with the community, and make their own decisions. And so again, these criteria apply to all types of settings. You'll see references to privacy, dignity, respect, freedom from coercion and restraint. The individuals are based on, the setting options are based on an individual's needs, preferences, resources, particularly when room and board is necessitated at a residential setting, and again, facilitating individual decision-making and autonomy. You see the first reference in the top left to a person-centered service plan, and we're going to talk more about that as we get further into the discussion. That continues to be the foundation of how an individual is to be supported in receiving services and how providers are to be determining how services are going to be provided to one individual as opposed to another. So the next couple of slides talk about some additional criteria that applies to a subset of home and community-based settings, and these are provider-owned residential settings. And so here we could be talking about a group home, an assisted living facility, any kind of variation on that theme, any kind of host home. States have all sorts of different titles for different service models in which someone is living in the home of the company, the provider, the individual who is furnishing services to them. And there's an additional set of home and community-based criteria because it's so that where you are living is so intrinsically linked, especially if you are receiving services in the place that you are living and from the individual from whom you are renting a space. That has some key implications for how you are exercising day-to-day decisions and autonomy. And so based on stakeholder comment, we developed this second set of criteria. And it includes things like an individual needs a legally enforceable lease, or in the absence of a lease, something else that carries the weight of law in that particular jurisdiction. It talks about responsibilities of residing in a particular place, rights of people who are living in a particular place. This is all to prevent inappropriate discharge and evictions. And then you see here on the second slide a list of a myriad of different types of requirements: privacy in sleeping or living units, an individual having the ability to lock their doors with only appropriate staff, having keys, choice of roommates if an individual needs to have a roommate, the ability to decorate your own space, the ability to have access to visitors at any time, the ability to have access to food at any time, the requirement that the space is physically accessible. Some of these things don't seem all that complicated, but we've actually needed to have many conversations with stakeholders to make sure everyone understands what we need. For example, the access to food at any time. That doesn't mean that individuals need to have access to a hot buffet 24 hours a day, but it means that if there is a mealtime at a particular time and someone misses that mealtime, they're not prohibited from eating until the next scheduled mealtime. There's snacks available, the ability to have a sandwich if you're not in love with what's on the menu that night, the ability to grab a piece of fruit in the afternoon if you're hungry. The same food decisions that you and I make on a daily basis, that's what really this is getting at here. It doesn't mean anything more formal or more complicated than that. And then there's similar conversations really that we could have about any of these criteria. The choice of roommates, certainly